Hello, everyone. Welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it's your online social psychology course. And I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in the fundamentals of social behavior. And boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of fundamentals to walk through today. These will serve kind of as fundamentals, the building blocks of future chapters within this course. So, with that said, let's jump into it. Beginning with a broad overview of evolution. Different species are descended from common ancestors, but have evolved over time, acquiring different genetic characteristics as a function of different environmental demands. Darwin proposed a theory of natural selection to explain the process through which evolution occurs. Certain attributes are more successful in a particular environment and therefore become more represented in future generations. So again, kind of broadly stated here, the environment presents different conditions, different demands. This can be weather related, or more broadly, just kind of climate. But ultimately, certain conditions exist in the environment in species with particular attributes that allow them to thrive, to survive, to means there will be more members of that species with those particular attributes, which then make it more likely that that attribute will be passed down to future generations within that species' offspring, aka natural selection. Reproduction equals variability. And for our statistics head, think of differences, changes, and this being facilitated through mutation and sexual recombination. That is because the offspring does not have exactly the same genetic makeup as their parents. Animals engage in competition and collaboration for mating partners and other resources. Animals with successful adaptation survive, reproduce, and shift population characteristics. Adaptation, broadly defined, are attributes that improve an individual's prospect for survival and reproduction. So again, variance, aka variability, that is differences, to pathways in which the variance is created that we'll focus on. Again, mutation, kind of a random change within a subspecies for a host of reasons, and sexual recombination, getting half your genes from your father and your mother. Those combinations of genes, contributing to differences within the broader species. And specific attributes within a species are more likely to be passed down intergenerationally, as those attributes allow or members of the species to survive and reproduce. Again, natural selection. Broad, kind of, again, all broadly stated, but we just kind of need the basics for the purposes of this class. Next, a common phrase you might hear often, survival of the fittest. What the quote fittest is depends on the environment. This does not necessarily mean the strongest or the most aggressive. Creatures adapted for warmth would not fit in cold environments, for example. What is the fittest also can shift over time. Mutations cause individuals of an aquatic species to develop new ways of obtaining oxygen so that they can survive on dry land, which was functional for their ancestors, or what was functional for their ancestors, such as gills, become worthless at this point. Environments can also change, making some adaptations significantly less adaptive than they once were. Naturalistic fallacy is a bias toward believing biological adaptations are inherently good, desirable, or ought to be, which is not necessarily so. The process of natural selection just happens. It has no intentions or strives towards, and it strives towards no goal. So kind of a quick overview. Again, we have fittest. The question is, what does fit mean? This is often portrayed as like the strongest, the most aggressive. However, that is not necessarily the case. So you can imagine a polar bear being dropped in the middle of a beach or whatever. Polar bears are quite strong and quite aggressive. However, they are not going to last long in that particular climate because their species adaptation is suited towards obviously a polar, much colder environment. Moreover, as stated, what is fit or an adaptation, kind of how positive, how strong, or I should say, the degree to which the likelihood of that attribute being passed down intergenerationally can decrease over time. So, for example, climate change, obviously. You can see this now, changing migratory bird patterns, or other animal migratory patterns. Some changes of animal behavior or species wiped out because literally the environment has now changed and a previous adaptation is quote unquote less adaptive now. So as such, kind of this idea of the naturalistic fallacy, that is just because an adaptation exists does not mean that it is inherently good. Kind of the central idea here when this is applied to like psychology, a lot of adaptation, or I should say kind of evolutionary ways of interpreting an event, this can be prone to fallacies because basically what ends up happening is you kind of look at this current state of the world, whatever that structure is, political, economic, cultural, social, whatever, and you say, okay, this exists now, therefore this kind of represents some kind of grand evolutionary chain of events from thousands of years ago to be at this exact, and therefore, kind of like the current like social relations or whatever, however the world is structured, is like either like A, just, or B, kind of like biologically rooted, like a natural kind of state of order of things. So, for example, you can imagine like 100 years ago or something like that, and be like, okay, and see like child labor laws and whatever, children working in factories in the U.S. and be like, well, that's because they biologically are supposed to be that way or something like that. Or women banned from kind of universities, largely speaking, 100 years ago. Therefore, that represents some biological lineage or something like that. With, again, point being that people just looking at kind of your current state of the world and then kind of projecting some kind of evolutionary reasoning to why it exists doesn't necessarily mean that there's not kind of evolutionary influence on a particular given state of the world, but it is prone to kind of projecting the current values of the world on kind of like an evolutionary lens, which, as we know today, child labor laws are different. So either humans biologically or genetically adapted over the last 100 years, which is basically not how evolution works, or a law has changed and now you can interpret this kind of evolutionary thought of child labor laws in a new way. So always be kind of cautious when kind of trying to use an evolutionary interpretation to research throughout this class. Which ties in and bleeds kind of right over to our next topic, that is general adaptations of the cultural animal. We're going to look at kind of two broad forms here, that is domain-specific adaptations, which are attributes that evolve to meet a particular challenge, but are not particularly useful when dealing with other types of challenges. So, for example, stomach acid allows you to break down resources, however, it doesn't help you grip a pencil. Versus domain general adaptations that are attributes that are used for dealing with various challenges across different areas of life. So the easiest way to think about this is separate the two main terms here, that is specific versus general. Specific, the attribute, the biological process, the social process, whatever it is, neurological process, serves one specific function. So, for example, your stomach acid, really good at breaking up food, minerals, whatever, extracting resources from the food that you eat. However, it doesn't really do a great job with helping you grip a pencil. Stomach acid really, is not used to process visual information. It's a specific adaptation that exists to perform a particular function. Versus a general adaptation, this is an adaptation that can be used across different challenges in life and can be generally applied to a wide arena of areas. So, for example, learning is like a massive, large construct. You can learn to read, learn to type, learn to farm, whatever. But that skill, learning, can be applied and used for a whole host of different environments. Or you can think of something else broad, like memory. Memory, you can short-term memory, all these different kinds of memory, but ultimately you can remember all kinds of different things across all kinds of different scenarios. So specific, hyper-specific versus very, very general, kind of broad skills, or biological and neurological functions. So let's talk about our 4 domain general adaptations kind of features here. A course assumption of social psychology is that behavior depends on a socially constructed view of reality. Humans are social beings. Human survival depends on social relationships. This is sometimes referred to in kind of cross-cultural psychology courses as humans being ultra-social beings. We depend on social relationships it's foundational to the species. There are very, very few, if any, moments of your life where you're not thinking about someone else, engaging with someone else, communicating with someone else, listening to a radio, watching a TV show, whatever. There is at all most parts of everybody's life. There is some kind of element of social relationships shaping the way we think, and behave. We can see this biologically and behaviorally. The human brain has evolved several tools to facilitate appropriate social sensitivity. For example, the recognition of human faces are thought to significantly take place in the fusiform face area. Social exclusion sensitivity. Social exclusion is associated with activation of an area of the brain which processes feelings of physical pain. It's argued that there's an inborn readiness to categorize people, such as status or hierarchy, and this idea or this process known as socialization. This is a lifelong process of learning from others what are desirable and undesirable styles of living. Human infants are born helpless and require years of care if they are to have any chance of survival. The extended period of immaturity and helplessness allows children to learn how to function well in the specific environment from which they develop. So kind of a quick overview here. We have the social exclusion sensitivity, kind of the idea that, again, trying to establish kind of a neurological basis and identify neurological information to demonstrate that humans are hypersocial beings. So kind of the idea here is that parts of the brain that are associated with processing physical pain are similarly activated when a person experiences emotional pain. So kind of the idea here is the global category is pain, and pain can have an emotional and physical form, thus again demonstrating that emotions are very important and ultimately foundational to the species, to such an extent that physical pain and emotional pain, some evidence that neurological networks process the same neurological networks process both forms of pain. Next is idea of socialization. So how morals are passed down intergenerationally, norms, rituals, political, economic, social beliefs passed down through this idea of socialization. And this occurs immediately there's some evidence prenatally, but also early childhood, but also through our lives, through the schools, through our jobs, interacting with our culture every single day. And kind of the idea here is that humans are extremely plastic. So you can think of plastic, like hot plastic that you can mold. In this case, humans born and even prenatally are extremely plastic. That is, our environments shape who we become. This takes place at a genetic level. This takes place at a biological, neurological, and a behavioral level. And kind of an interpretation of why humans are so kind of like worthless and can't really do anything, can't function independently for years. It's a very long developmental process for a child to even be relatively self-sufficient, have movement, be able to eat independently. Is that hyper prolonged developmental process gives human offspring a long amount of long duration to be shaped by their environmental influence. So culture, their social world, literally shaping who you become biologically and behaviorally, again, demonstrating kind of the species features of human, this extreme elongated development, ultimately demonstrating the importance of social relationships, culture, and all these other things on human developmental outcomes. Unlike, say, like a giraffe or whatever, it's born and, whatever it is, 3 days, I don't know, not giraffe expert. They're walking around and they can eat a little bit. Versus humans, they ain't moving for months in any like stable, independent way. Next in our general adaptations is intelligence. Humans have the ability to imagine a future. This supports a, quote, uniquely human form of control over the world. We're capable of altering the world / our environment. Symbolic thought and language enables humans to consider multiple conceptions and to communicate these to others. For example, a stop sign. Most symbols bear no obvious relationship to the objects or ideas that they represent. The connection of specific meanings to arbitrary systems enables humans to consider a wide variety of concepts and communicate these ideas to other humans. It also enables people to think and communicate about other people, objects, and events that are not in their current environment. So although we are deeply shaped by our environment, that elongated developmental process wherein we're very plastic, being shaped by our cultures, both, again, biologically and socially, by interacting with our environments, we are not destined to kind of recreate the exact same world. Because the world is social, that means it can be changed. So, and then one way this features of human species allows for kind of capable of altering the world and our environments is our ability to imagine a future. We can create a future in our head that has maybe no resemblance at all to the current world. But ultimately, this allows us to imagine different ways of being, different cultural norms, different practices, different systems that exist. So one little hopeful message from social psychology is, yes, the world is social and thus you can change it. Now, granted, that change can be good. It can also be very bad, but that's just kind of the nature of humanity. And briefly, humans, again, are able to use symbolic thought that are symbols that really don't even look or often even sound like what the symbol is supposed to represent. So, for example, stop sign. The octagon has no meaning of stop. It doesn't mean stop. We are just saying that sign means that you stop. So basically, the idea here is that we can use objects, ideas, objects in our environments and then give them social meaning, which allows us to communicate things very quickly across a whole host of different environments, demonstrating again the complexity and the necessity of social relationships to human species. Wonderful mammals we all are. Continuing on with intelligence, domain general adaptations. We humans have the ability to think about the self symbolically. This enables people to think about the meaning of experiences. It allows people to think about who they are. So that is, I am. And I know that I am. And I know that I know that I am. Having a sense of self makes possible to evaluate one's actions, feelings, thoughts, or overall sense of identity in light of one's values, ambitions, and principles. Quote, am I the person I aim to be? And then you can modify your thoughts and behaviors to bring them in line with those standards. Being able to think about the self symbolically enables people to mentally simulate, future events and to imagine various possibilities for their lives. The concept of self connects the past, present, and future. This is adaptive because it improves the ability to monitor and change behavior, increasing our chances of survival. So humans do not think of themselves as just you taking individual specific actions that are disconnected from the past or the future or the present. We create a kind of biological or a biographical memory. We have this idea of ourself that exists. And we can think about this symbolically. Again, humans are able to think through that I am. So I am a person. I know that I am a person. And I know that I'm thinking about this. So kind of the idea here, knowing that I exist as a person, which allows you to evaluate your feelings, your thoughts, your actions. Think about who you are and who you want to be, and thus theoretically change your behavior to fit in with whatever your goals are or the social standards, the cultural values of a particular context, or to even change that context. But ultimately, the self allows you to think about the past, the present, and the future in ways that, at the very least, are amplified among humans. Our next general adaptation are mental systems, looking at two types of processes. The first, automatic. This is defined as human thoughts or actions that occur quickly, often without the aid or of conscious awareness. In controlled processes, human thoughts or actions that occur more slowly and deliberately, and are motivated by some goal that is often consciously recognized. So stopping here at automatic, so kind of using the typical forms of the word, the typical definitions associated with the word, automatic, that is, it's human thought or action, almost reflexively, occurring quickly and typically without direct conscious awareness at times. versus controlled, which is slowly. You're thinking something through elaborately. You maybe have a goal in mind, but ultimately you're putting like deep or heavy amount of cognitive resources into a thought process to come to some sort of decision versus kind of automatic. Again, reflective, not really thinking about your decision, at least consciously. So Freud argued that human behavior is a result of non-conscious processes. So, for example, you don't have to think about pumping your blood or moving away from a car running you over. Freud leveraged this idea called the experiential system, that is thought and decision making that relies on emotions, intuitions, and images processed in the brain's, quote, evolutionary older regions, including the limbic system. So as a quick overview, Freud thought that most human behavior was a result of non-conscious, unconscious processes. That is things that you don't remember, things that you're not actively thinking about. Those are the drivers of your thoughts and actions, and you are not really sure actually why you're performing those actions or those thoughts. Thus, kind of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis kind of thing, wherein you kind of identify the reasons why those unconscious processes exist, and ultimately why your behavior is what it is. Which brings us to this evolutionary older brain regions. Kind of the idea here is theoretically you can look at older species and see what brain regions they have. So like whatever, there are very species that existed 100,000 years before humans, for example, or there's evidence of this species having a limbic system, amygdala, kind of processing fear and stuff like that, and maybe like reptiles or something like that. And well, that's or I should say the presence of those kind of similar neurological systems in reptiles as humans kind of suggests that those parts of the brain developed evolutionarily speaking before, say, the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with kind of very much like deliberate goal, motivation, kind of seeking behaviors. And that the prefrontal cortex exists or doesn't exist, or is much smaller or something like that, or less active in kind of a very older species, gives evidence that the prefrontal cortex, for example, developed later, evolutionarily speaking. Is kind of like the broad discussion here about this brain's evolutionary regions. But for our purpose, just kind of know the general difference between automatic and controlled processes. Our conversation about Freud and kind of those older evolutionary speaking brain systems lead us nicely into James. He argued that consciously controlled behavior can become non-conscious and automatic. So a conscious, elaborate way of thinking, a process of thinking can go from conscious, again, kind of elaborative, requiring a lot of resources, to non-conscious, automatic, reflexive, not requiring a lot of effort. So we go from conscious to unconscious, non-conscious, or automatic controlled behavior, according to James. He relies on this idea of the rational system. That is greater activation of this system from the more recently evolved frontal lobes of the cerebrum and supports control processes. Most people the rational system is most active when people have sufficient time, motivation, and attention to think carefully about their situations and themselves. Learning to play a musical instrument, for example, requires rigorous conscious attention over long hours of repetitive practice. Once the musical skills have been acquired, however, playing the instrument becomes quite automatic. So as stated before, we kind of have this theoretical older parts of our brain and kind of theoretically newer, evolutionarily speaking, parts of our brain. For example, the frontal lobes, which contains prefrontal cortex. And other parts of the brain, again, associated with goal-seeking behavior or just kind of elaborate, complex thought and conscious thought in general. So James is going to argue that something that required conscious control behavior can eventually become automatic. So our example, we have a musical instrument. When you first learn a musical instrument, you're hyper-focused on it. You're thinking it through, listening to whatever it is that you listen to while learning a musical instrument. I have no musical ability. However, once you've spent 5 years, 10 years working with that musical instrument, That skill becomes automatic. You don't have to think it through as thoroughly each time you play it. You may even struggle to explain how it is or what it is that you're doing, because now it has moved to this unconscious realm. Now, of course, these conscious and non-conscious kind of blend together, but I'm just broadly speaking for sake of simplicity. And why does this exist? Why could conscious thoughts or constant behavior become non-conscious and automatic? Well, it allows people to get stuff done without actively thinking about the tasks they're performing, of freeing their minds to concentrate on something else. So driving a car all of a sudden becomes a much more automatic, non-conscious process. So now you can think about what it is you have to do to work tomorrow, what you're going to cook for dinner. Now, granted, also people still crash your car too much, so that can be a problem. This also can be kind of how cultural values and behaviors are passed through time. So maybe more consciously taught at some parts of our lives, but through time, through socialization, these ways of seeing the world, the moral values, these rituals become automatic to us through time. Our third general adaptation is goals. Humans are motivated, goal-striving beings. Motivation? Generating and expending energy toward achieving or avoiding some outcome. It varies by strength and direction, that is, toward a specific state. Some people are motivated to lose weight, while others seek to gain weight. And among those who want to lose weight, some are highly motivated to do so, while others are much less motivated to do so. So stopping there, motivation. So you can be motivated towards graduating. You're working towards a degree. Or maybe you're working to avoid entering the quote-unquote real world, getting a quote-unquote real job. Ultimately, though, you are motivated towards a particular set of behaviors. And that motivation can be strong or very weak. And obviously, there's going to be a range from zero motivation to 100% motivation that you fall on at a particular day or time throughout the day. Humans direct their behavior toward the satisfactions of needs and goals. Needs, operationally defined here as internal states that drive action that is necessary to survive or thrive. People are not always aware that their behavior is directed toward a particular goal or what underlying need their current goals ultimately serve. Goals, broadly and operationally defined here as cognitions that represent outcomes for which we strive in order to meet our needs and desires. There are different theoretical approaches to what it is that humans need. For example, self-determination theory argues that the need for competence, being able to do things successfully, relatedness, that is having close connections with other people, and autonomy, being in control of one's life, are basic prerequisites for human well-being, and that functional or psychological functioning deteriorates when these needs are not met. So humans direct their behavior towards needs and goals. Again, self-determination theory, outlining these needs of competence, relatedness, and autonomy. And the idea here, again, is when needs are not met, there are some kind of dysfunctioning, psychologically speaking. So this can be either kind of negative behaviors, acting out, or maybe possibly the development of particular disorders. There's kind of, again, different theoretical interpretations of behaviors. So another kind of big thing in psychology is that there are competing theories and different explanations on why behaviors occur. So in this case here, that is self-determination theory. Maybe a person has low levels of relatedness, that is low amounts of close connections with other people. Maybe they have very low levels of autonomy, having very little control of their lives. Those people at greater risk of abusing alcohol, greater risk of developing an anxiety disorder, a major depressive disorder, maybe some other kind of psychological disorder, because of these species-specific needs being not met. And just to jump back for a second, goals, again, cognitions that represent outcomes for which we strive in order to meet our needs and desires. So say to meet your need of high relatedness to people, that is being close to people. So you have that need of being close to people. You set a goal that, okay, after New Year's, I'll talk to the cashier for a minute. I'll talk to my best friend 20 minutes per week or something like that. So goals are the outcome we want. It's that it is having a best friend, having a whatever, husband, wife, partner, something along those lines. But ultimately, that outcome of marriage, relationship, best friend, whatever, is meeting that need. And according to the self-determination theory, that need relatedness. According to Rank, there are two basic motivational orientations which guide human behaviors. The first, security, which involves avoiding the bad, and growth, which involves approaching the good. Expanding on these thoughts, security and growth tendency often interact. Tensions can occur between goals. Rank argued that children frequently are distressed and anxious and seek relief from these negative feelings through the nourishment, safety, and comfort provided by their parents or guardians. Avoid negative emotions by establishing and sustaining a secure relationship with their loving and protective parents. Goal/growth oriented, when children are able to maintain a sense of security and, as a result, begin to explore their surroundings in ways that expand their physical, cognitive, emotional, and interpersonal capabilities. So Rank's arguing that these psychological motives, again, security and growth, security being avoiding the bad, growth approaching the good. They can these psychological motives can interact, and that interaction can create tensions between those goals. Because in order to develop as a human being, you have to take risks. So you have to, in order to grow, talk to somebody for the first time, or whatever, try a new hobby for the first time. Ultimately, though, development involves risks, which are fundamental to growth. But also, there is security, psychological motives as well. So basically, what Rank argues is that when children are distressed and anxious, they depend on their guardians to kind of decrease those feelings of anxiety and distress. The guardians serve as kind of a source of external stress regulation or emotional regulation. And when children are able to establish a secure relationship based on kind of love and protection with their guardians or parents, that allows the child to have like a base to be able to retreat from when they're anxious. So the child, whatever, can explore. There'll be cultural variation on this, but whatever, a kid can take risks, within context of a toddler or whatever, or early childhood, take a risk, interact with the world. If the child it becomes anxious or just kind of needs a soothing period, they can go back to their guardian for security. So that secure relationships allows for fulfills both kind of psychological motives. It provides a secure base, a sense of security, avoiding the bad, while at the same time allows a child to explore and grow. And again, if they're overwhelmed, they can come back to the secure base. Is kind of the idea here. And how this plays out as an adulthood and really throughout the lifespan is that social compliance can help sustain our sense of security. It makes us feel that we are accepted by the world around us and affirm our self-worth because we're acting within our kind of consistent with our greater whatever cultural social group. So the argument is by accepting our cultural values, obeying, you are theoretically satisfying that sense of security, while at the same time, people express their views and seek some kind of degree of freedom, which allows and satisfies the need of growth. Let's talk about a specific example of a goal and motivations. So to begin, any goal can be understood as helping the person to achieve another goal that is more abstract, that is higher up in the hierarchy. So we have a hierarchy of goals. So say, for example, we try and answer a question and imagine a person named Rita. Rita is tying her shoe. The question is, why is Rita tying her shoes? Well, to answer that question, you need to know a little bit about Rita or where Rita is performing that action. Say Rita is tying her shoes at a 5K race. And say that race is the winner receives a college scholarship. And say Rita would like to earn a college scholarship and work towards a Nobel Prize or something like that in the science of her choice. So why is Rita tying her shoe? Well, as stated before, there's going to be different theoretical interpretations of this question, or to answer this question. From an existential perspective, Rita is ultimately trying to maintain a sense of personal value, identity, and purpose that helps her to deal with unpleasant facts of life. So, as we talked about in the previous chapter, existential perspective, kind of the idea that you're going to die, but at the same time, we need to maintain a sense of purpose in life, a sense of identity, and a sense of meaning in the actions that we take in life. So thus, tying her shoes gives Rita meaning because it will reaffirm her identity as a runner, as a potential scientist, and ultimately give her life meaning. Being able to recognize and differentiate between particular types of emotions. So, am I sad? Am I angry? Why am I sad or am I angry? Will kind of facilitate more positive outcomes when making complex social decision making, because you have a better understanding of your needs and your desires, partially facilitated by kind of recognizing your own emotions and theoretically the emotions of other people. So emotions allowing us to understand our needs and desires and needs and desires of other people, and consequently coming to or behaving in socially appropriate and quote unquote rational ways. Every person has three primary psychological dimensions. The first, universal, involves characteristics shared by all humans, all members of a species. Individual dimensions, these are personal attitudes, beliefs, and personality. They result from a combination of a person's genetic makeup and life experiences that help distinguish one from others. And a cultural dimension, aspects of a person shaped, that is, socialized, for example, by specific culture. So we have universal dimensions. We all are social creatures. We all have similar gestational periods during pregnancy, similar kind of broad developmental outcomes. You're not going to you're not going to be 4 years old and just not a fly or something, just through genetics or something like that. Not going to happen. You also have quote unquote individual dimensions. Again, your personal beliefs, personalities and attitudes, and cultural dimensions. So those cultural values and beliefs. And of course, these cultural and quote unquote individual dimensions, they bleed together. You're not a hermetically sealed being. These things are going to interact with each other in dynamic ways, contributing to differences in behaviors and creations of thousands and thousands of cultures who have risen and fallen throughout human history. Culture is arguably the premier human adaptations. Culture can be defined in multiple ways, but for the purposes of this class, we will operationally define culture as sets of beliefs, attitudes, values, norms, morals, customs, roles, statuses, symbols, and rituals shared by self-identified group, a group whose members think of themselves as a group. As stated already, humans spend the bulk of their waking hours and much of their time sleeping, embedded in a world of ideas and values that gives life's meaning, significance, purpose, and direction. Cultures are perpetuated when they are passed from generation to generation, yet they continually change in response to influences from the environment, the needs of their members, and contact with other cultures. So stopping there, this is an important point. We'll circle back around to it momentarily, and that is cultures are passed down across generations. However, cultures change. There is no static culture that has existed for thousands of years. Because cultures reflect a person's environments and the members of that group. And that environment can include weather, climate, sources of food, political values, social values, economic values, all these different environmental things, needs of the members, their new desires, interaction with different cultures, all blend together to shift culture through time. Because culture is a social phenomenon created by humans. Granted, there are arguments that different species have have culture, but for purposes of our class, focusing on humans, so human-created social sets of beliefs, attitudes, values, etc. Again, hopeful message being, you can always change a culture, and again, that change, however, can be positive or negative. Now, for example, consider the present moment right now as you read this sentence. This is a moment of your conscious experience of life, a moment you will never experience again. It's gone, and now you are on to another fleeting moment. Your conscious life consists of a continual sequence of such moments interspersed with sleep until you die. But is that generally how you conceive of time? Probably not. We think of times in terms of minutes, hours, days, years, categories that allow us to maintain a sense of meaning, significance, and purpose and direction in life, critical to human developmental outcomes, in the basis of many psychological theories, including the self-determination theory that we already discussed. Let's talk about some features of culture and operationally define some key terms. Beginning with beliefs, these are accepted ideas about some aspect of reality. They are cultural truisms, things that we believe to be true, socially speaking. Beliefs are generally taken on faith and based on learning from parents, teachers, and other cultural authorities rather than being derived through specific personal experiences. Such beliefs create expectations that structure our experience and help us navigate through the world. Have faith in the culture. Example of how culture helps people in a group to create a shared sense of reality. So beliefs are taught to us from other important cultural figures within our greater culture. When cultures are stable, they typically have belief systems that are relatively not challenged compared to other features of a given culture. So, for example, some belief in afterlife, whatever form, or don't believe in it, whatever, but ultimately the people in that culture, in general speaking, relatively don't take a point of contention with that belief. It is expected, it is shared by everyone around you. Members of that culture believe that people within it share that same belief, and thus they create a shared sense of reality, a shared set of expectations that allow them to operate, that allow people to navigate their world and kind of know what to expect based on these greater cultural beliefs. Or, for example, you can believe in the judicial system or something like that in the United States, and you believe that there's going to be kind of a fairness or something about that. So you have an expectations about how your court case or whatever, a high-profile court case is going to go. It is a belief of faith in those institutions and also the people who are teaching you, those cultural leaders who are teaching you those particular cultural beliefs. Attitudes are preferences that refer specifically to how things are evaluated as good or bad. A group of people may share the belief that marijuana is legal in Colorado, but their attitude toward the legalization could be favorable or unfavorable. So you can believe marijuana is legal in Colorado, so you believe in the legitimacy of the state of Colorado or whatever the laws are or something. The greater U.S. project, however it relates to these laws. But at the same time, your attitude can say, oh, I don't think it should be legal, or whatever, you think it should be more legal, whatever that means. Everybody gets a free joint when they turn 18 or something. I don't know. Values are guiding principles and should share goals of members in a wide range of situations. They stem from the two basic motivational orientations according to rank, security, and growth. Schwartz and colleagues in 1992 argued that all cultures tend to recognize the same 10 values. However, different cultures prioritize different values. And these are the 10 values. For example, some cultures put greater priority in universalism, for example, or maybe greater value in stimulation. So maybe more cultural beliefs, different attitudes, different norms with higher, that reflect greater levels of stimulation, greater excitement, greater novelty, greater challenges in life. So I'm not going to walk through all of these, but kind of the idea here is just know the general differences. I'm not going to get into super distinct ones, but very, very kind of broad ones here. So if I ask, this culture has very high levels of respect and commitment towards customs, that culture would be high in tradition. So kind of broad here, that's kind of what I'm looking for. Doesn't have to be this complicated. Continuing with the elements of culture, we have norms, shared beliefs about appropriate or expected behavior in particular situations. They can be strong or weak. So for example, what do you do in an elevator? What do you do in a court? What do you do when you walk into a restaurant? Well, in an elevator, some cultures, maybe you're on far sides of the elevator. Maybe you talk to each other. Maybe you're staring at a wall. What do you do when you're in court? Whatever, rise for the judge, sit, whatever. There's a whole set of procedures. Very strong norms that exist on how you communicate and how you behave in particular social situations. Those would be very strong norms. However, there are other norms in more weak, ambiguous situations. So what do you do when you're hanging out with friends? Obviously, there are some norms, but there's going to be kind of variance on what you're going to do in different kind of groups. So norms, again, expected behaviors in particular situations. They can be strong and weak. They're not a dichotomy, but they're on a spectrum like everything in psychology. Morals are beliefs about the nature of good and bad behavior. We'll look at three subtypes of morals. The first, community morals, which are social obligations, respect for authority, and loyalty to the group. Secondly, autonomy morals, that is infringing on individuals' rights and freedoms. And third, divinity morals, what is considered sacred and pure in culture. You may have heard of Kohlberg's kind of moral theory. That is one theoretical theory of morals, but there are others. And kind of a critique of the classic Kohlberg model is that they do not include these other components of morality. Again, community, autonomy, and divinity are the three components we are focusing on. Make sure you kind of know the broad differences. Divinity, kind of morality, centered on what is pure, what is sacred. So is eating animals or a particular animal or behaving a particular way. These are divinity morals. Community morals, you have a social responsibility, a social obligation. And to perform those social obligations is to be a moral person. And then autonomy morals, more right to freedom, maybe pursue some kind of goal or a career-oriented goal, or having some kind of right to self-expression, whatever form that is, depending on the country. Those would be would represent high autonomy morals. Now, moral judgments depends on many cultural factors, including religion, political orientation, and values. For example, cultures that place high on conformity, such as China, are likely to emphasize community morals, while cultures that value quote-unquote self-direction, such as the United States, is likely to emphasize autonomy morals, while cultures that value traditions, such as Yemen, are likely to emphasize divinity morals. And pausing here for a second, within a given country, there can be multiple cultures. For example, in the US, there are different racial groups, different minority groups, different political groups with different sets of morals and differences in something rates of collectivism and individualism, which we'll talk about momentarily. But for now, broad picture is yes, there are greater kind of structures that exist within a given country in the US, which reflect particular morals and norms and beliefs. But even within a given culture, there are some variations that challenge said beliefs, norms, and structures throughout time. Because again, these are social things. Even if we describe meaning to them, they ultimately come and go through times, which is the value of anthropology. Reading about that, ladies and gentlemen. And like we talked about with other cultural elements, these norms, morals, beliefs change through time, as stated. Next, we have customs, which are specific patterns or styles of dress, speech, and behavior deemed appropriate in a particular context within a given culture. In Japan, it is customary to burp after an enjoyable meal. In Navajo culture, the first person who sees a baby smile, which typically doesn't happen until about 6 weeks after birth, is expected to throw a party to celebrate the child. All cultures share certain elements, but put a distinct mark on them. For example, people in virtually every culture use jewelry, tattoos, and other techniques to adorn their bodies and advertise their status. The style of ornamentation, however, differs greatly from culture to culture. So customs are typically followed, but cannot always be pleasant. For example, if you have to throw a party, if you see a baby smiling, you maybe try to avoid babies so you don't have to partake in that particular custom. And as stated, all cultures have kind of artistic expression, cultural expression, self-expression, jewelry, tattooing, other techniques, as you can see on the right-hand side, with Paul Wall, whose, quote, his mouth is often looking something like a crystal ball. Next, we have social roles. These are positions within a group that entail specific ways of acting, dividing labor, responsibility, and resources. The enactor of a role usually communicates that role through certain forms of conduct, appearance, and demeanor that are recognized by other members of a group. So, for example, I'm a teacher, I have a certain position, and I'm supposed to act a certain way. I'm supposed to appear a certain way. I'm not supposed to, do certain things within my role. We have a cultural expectation of how I'm supposed to act and how you're supposed to act as a student. But some roles can also be defined beyond occupation, such as gender. So there are gender roles, which are supposed to shape a person's thoughts and behaviors. And other people have expectations on how people act depending on their gender. Again, these gender roles change through time. We also have cultural symbols, represent culture as a whole, beliefs or values prevalent in a culture. A common type of cultural symbol are rituals, which are patterns of action performed in particular reinforcing contexts that often signal change associated with beginning or end of something biological, historical, or having cultural significance. These include funerals, weddings, tea ceremonies, mature-related ceremonies such as quinceañeras, confirmations, bar mitzvahs, birthday parties, and bridal showers. They serve a number of psychological functions, including helping to solidify social cohesion of the group. So these rituals, as stated, represent the beginning or end of something. So funeral, death, or some funerals, life, whatever, rebirth or something along those lines, or some kind of coming of age ceremony where you now have taken on new responsibilities, new obligations, new social roles within that context. Birthday parties, you're growing older, whatever. But ultimately, these rituals serve a social function. They welcome in younger generations or younger cohorts into adulthood. They can connect the dying to the already dead or the living, something along those lines. But ultimately, it's serving as a social glue to hold us together and affirm our beliefs and values across generations and across a person's lifespan. Cultural innovations can accumulate far more rapidly than genetic mutations, and good ideas can spread horizontally across populations, as well as vertically between generations. Culture provides a uniquely advantageous means for adapting to environmental changes. So kind of stopping here, genetic mutations or kind of genetic changes within the species, typically, just broadly saying hundreds of years, thousands of years sakes. However, cultures shift far more quickly and can accumulate far more quickly, and they can spread from person to person and from generation to generation. That is vertical. And the idea is that cultures that allows humans to adapt at a far quicker rate than other species. So, for example, some kind of climate change. There's more rates of snow within a given area. Theoretically, you can dress kind of warmer, and different cultural festivals and rituals, norms, and beliefs can then be modified to reflect a greater snow within winter or something along those lines. But ultimately, culture allows for rapid adaptation for groups of people. And one reason why, although humans genetically have been quite similar for many centuries, cultures come and go, civilizations fall, empires fall, groups change, identities change, meaning, purpose. All those kind of cultural elements shift through time, while genetically humans have remained the same. Now, what are some kind of methods through which culture is spread? One, cultural evolution, a process whereby cultures develop and propagate according to systems of beliefs or behaviors that contribute to the success of a society. So these changes in belief systems within the culture allows for greater adaptation. Again, adaptation could be good or bad. It just exists. Now, granted, for the adaptation nerds, some people say maladaptive. Some adaptation scholars reject the idea of maladaption, that there's only adaptation and you can describe it good or bad, but whatever. But the point being, for the purpose of our class, things can change quickly. Cultural beliefs can change quickly. Social norms shifts, laws shifts within the last 100 years within this country. In the United States, fashion changes, how people dress, the music people listen to. These change through time and reflect changes in the environment or priorities within environments. So economic, political, social, whatever, big. If you think Bronfenbrenner, those big macro chrono level systems, environmental factors. There's cultural diffusion, the transfer of inventions, knowledge, and ideas from one culture to another. And oft overlooked consequences of cultural diffusion is that all, but possibly the most isolated of cultures are hybrid products of many cultures. Cultures are complex and useful adaptations, best viewed as cumulative, collaborative products of the ingenuity of the entire human species, and hence should be sources of pride for us all, rather than only for members of particular groups. So as stated before in previous slides, cultural fusion, cultures influence one another. There is no, even the most isolated tribes, many anthropologists argue, no such thing as an isolated culture. Even the most isolated tribes understand that there are other systems that exist, other tribes, or however they want to conceptualize it, that exist. However, they choose to understand that and then stay where they are. They're aware of it and change norms accordingly to maybe avoid that contact. But ultimately, through travel, technology, colonialization, tourism, all these things, cultures are diffuse and hybrid products of each other. Thus, cultures are accumulation of human thoughts, belief systems, and adaptations through time. Pieces of technological advance in different parts of the world coming together, different belief systems, whatever, coming together to create the current social world. Cultural transmission is the process whereby members of a culture learn explicitly or implicitly to imitate the beliefs and behaviors of others in the culture. So we go to school and we learn, not, preschool, you're not, 3 years old, you're not doing a lot, but you are learning norms of how to communicate with people, expectations, whatever, Pledge of Allegiance, or whatever it is this particular country has. But those beliefs and behaviors explicitly and implicitly taught to us from a very young age, which allows for intergenerational transmission of culture. Warner proposed that culture helps people adapt to three aspects of their environment. That is the physical, social, and metaphysical environment. And although all these kind of the quote-unquote environmental domains interact with each other for kind of a clarity within our purposes of our class, we will kind of try and separate out these components. Beginning with the physical environment, people live in groups. As group size increased, so did the number of humans available to learn from, and the resulting stock of shared knowledge. Because culture is accumulation of kind of that knowledge, more people around, more sources of information. This promoted more rapid development, initially of tools and later of symbols, rituals, and other aspects of culture. Groups adapt by creating technologies in response to specific environmental challenges. So groups living in areas with rich supplies of plants were especially likely to develop technology for harvesting fruits and nuts. So our environments influencing the type of technologies that we create to meet these environmental challenges. So you can imagine living in a place with a lot of bodies of water. So then we develop very good boating skills to navigate our environment, to reach food and communicate with others, travel, whatever it is. Adaptation to physical surroundings influences people's basic perceptions and thought processes. So people from predominantly sedentary agricultural cultures, such as the ballet in the Ivory Coast in West Africa, are not so skilled in visual spatial tasks, but are stronger in quantitative tasks. Australian Aborigines do very well in spatial memory tasks. However, they do not do as well on quantitative tasks. The Muller-Lyer illusion, this is a cross-cultural research, has shown that the more a culture relies on the cultural innovation of carpentry, with the extensive use of straight edges and right angles, the more its members fall prey to the illusion. Rural Zambians from the Zambezi Valley inhabit environments that have less carpented structures and so are rarely exposed to straight lines and sharp angles. So as stated, we develop technologies in response, or partially in response to our environmental conditions, such as our food supplies, but also our physical environments impact how our basic thought processes and perceptions are shaped. So things that are, again, kind of universal. We all have perceptions and thought processes. However, again, our environment here, our cultures impact these kind of universal dimensions of humanity. So, for example, some cultures are very strong at visual spatial tasks, while other cultures are stronger at quantitative tasks. You can also see this reflected in particular tasks, such as this Muller-Lyer illusion. So on the right-hand side, you'll see two lines here. People from cultures who rely on carpentry, that is, again, those kind of straight edges and right angles, such as in the United States, are more likely to fall for this illusion. And what is this illusion? That those lines on the right-hand side are different. So people from North America are more likely to be fooled by this illusion and say that those two lines are different. However, different sizes in length. Well, however, as stated, rural Zambians, wherein they inhabit environments where there are less carpeted structures, are far less likely to fall for this illusion. Again, our environments impacting how we perceive the world around us, and just basic processes such as the length of these two lines. Next, adapting to the social environment. Fisk argued that there are four basic patterns of social relationships. The first, community sharing. Cooperation and self-sacrifice are prevalent, and as in a family, what mine is yours. Authority ranking. One person gives orders and the other follows him or her, like a sergeant and a private in the army. Equality matching. Everyone is treated equally and has the same rights as is typical in a relationship, or I should say in a friendship. Market pricing. Relationship follows economic principles, as in typical in business relationships. All four of these relationship patterns can be found in every known culture. However, their prevalence, that is the rates of particular types of social relationships, vary across cultures. So quickly, in a community, they're sharing, and this form of social relationship, we kind of like a pot of goods, and what's mine is yours, maybe in like a little family household, and we're kind of like sharing food. But this can also take place in like tribes, neighborhoods, or theoretically countries, or some other form of social organization that doesn't exist yet. Then you have authority ranking, aka I give you orders and then you follow them. So maybe much more hierarchical, military based, and different. There's also this can take place like in a business, for example. Like you as an employee in general do not have equal ranking and decision making capabilities as your manager. They give you an order and you're going to follow them. Granted, you can quit as well. And then jumping into market pricing, here the structure of the social relationship is primarily just based on economic principles. So say we're in a business partnership and we don't know each other anywhere outside of that, or maybe we even did. But now that we're in this business partnership, we're going to hold ourselves to different kind of expectations. We're in whatever, for profit motivation or even demonstrating kind of fluidity of some of these categories, employee and like manager, or owner and manager, and owner and employee, something along those lines. But ultimately, we're using business of economic principles, aka capitalism in this case, to structure our business relationships. So relationships have different patterns, and those patterns are kind of embedded within particular parts of our environment. So within a business, within the army, within a family, within a community, whatever. Now we're going to move on to differences in individualism and collectivism. This is a minor detour initially, and then we kind of return to it, but it's all more or less kind of similar ideas here. Individualism versus collectivism is kind of the idea here. Usually thought of as, often thought of as a dichotomy. However, really, again, think of it as a spectrum, wherein cultures share different aspects of individualism and collectivism. And for that matter, this is going to be very, very, very broad. There's a lot of distinctions here. We're just looking for generalities, or we would be here all day. But suffice to say that how a culture defines individualism and how it defines collectivism, aka the behaviors associated with them, even that can differ. So two cultures that define themselves as quote unquote collectivists can have different behaviors associated with that collectivism, which can be described as individualistic in different cultures. So again, a lot of variation here, but we're kind of being broad. Beginning with the interdependent self and the independent self. The interdependent self, viewing yourself primarily in terms of how one relates to others and contributes to the greater whole. These are more likely among collectivist cultures. When these researchers ask people to complete the sentence, I am, those raised in collectivist cultures tended to fill in the blank with responses indicating their social relationship, such as, I am a daughter, and group identification, I am Malaysian, versus independent self, viewing yourself as unique active agents serving one's own goals, and this is more likely among individualistic cultures. So for example, when you answer I am, people with this independent self are more likely to state personality traits such as I am honest, and feelings, that is, I am happy. So we, in the West, especially, in the US especially, we tend to think of this self as purely independent. But this is not universal. There are ideas of the interdependent self as stated in the independent self. And as stated, one way you measure this is asking people the I am questionnaire, wherein you just ask them, you have like I am and it's blank, and you have people write what they are. And again, in collectivist cultures, reflecting kind of this idea of obligation and connection to other people, they complete the I am test with more responses that relate to social relationships and group identifications. And these are two figures that try to illustrate these differences of selves, independent and interdependent. And these are just one model. Even the interdependent and independent selves, kind of what this means in practice, there are different models. There are different interpretations of this, as stated. There's not just one, the psychology says, for so many of these things. But here on the left-hand side, you can see the differences visually, wherein the individual and kind of the X's would be particular like traits of a person. See how it's surrounded by a dark, bold, complete line. So you have yourself that you bring with you to other people. You interact with other people. However, your individual self does not change according to this independent view of self. You interact with others, but you have kind of a stable sense of self. And not only that, the people in your in-group, see how it's surrounded by a dashed line, that represents that in more individualistic cultures, again, too broadly stated, but for the purpose of our class, just stating this, people move in and out of in-groups and out-groups far easier because your self is stable and you're not dependent on other people. So it's not that big of a deal for people to come in and out of your in and out of your in-group. And on the right-hand side, you have your independent or interdependent self. Again, more likely to be found in collectivist cultures, broadly speaking. Here you can see the individual and their traits are surrounded by a dotted line, reflecting the fluidity of the self and how we are affected by our friends and our parents and our guardians, and ultimately people within our in-group. And you can see the in-group has a solid line, demonstrating that the in-group is tight and secure and stable through time. Why does that matter? Because in collectivist cultures, because your in-group affects who you are, you have to be careful about who you allow to be in your in-group. There are much more social obligations and greater repercussions of yourself, how you define yourselves, and how you interact, and think with others than a random stranger. Continuing on with our two broad distinctions for the purpose of our class between collectivist and individualistic cultures that are actually not a dichotomy, fitting in and sticking out. Collectivist cultures prioritize social harmony and meeting cultural expectations. A sense of social obligation to fill one's duties is much more closely aligned with a sense of choice and agency. Individualistic priorities prioritize personal freedom and freedom of speech. Perhaps for these reasons, whereas those from Eastern cultures generally prefer to be small frogs in big ponds, that is, be less individually successful in a more prestigious group, those from Western cultures often prefer to be big frogs in small ponds. So here we have collectivist cultures more likely to prioritize social harmony in meeting cultural expectations. And it's not that they do not have a sense of choice and agency, is that this cultural belief system includes the idea that choice and agency is not mutually exclusive from social obligation. They go together. A part of choice and agency must factor social obligation. So it's a different kind of beliefs on what the requirements and even what choice and agency means within a given culture. Now, of course, this does not mean that collectivist cultures do not experience shifts and changes and cultures and rises and falls and empires, all these other things. Those also exist. And as stated, even within individualistic cultures, due to because the cultures are not just monolith, but contain many different people with different views and different belief systems at times from the larger country, for example, culture. So in the U.S., you see particular racial groups, minority groups, or certain economic political ideologies have different senses of social obligation, for example. So, for example, Black and Hispanic U.S. Americans are much more likely to have higher rates of collectivism in certain behaviors and certain beliefs about social obligations within their groups. Continuing on, individualistic and collectivist cultures differ in ways that emotions are experienced and displayed. The collectivist emphasis on harmony prioritizes social cohesion over the freedom to broadcast one's emotional reaction. Changes in cultural values. They can occur from socioeconomic development, aka some kind of economic development, industrial technology and economic advancements, and democratization. Now, authors use kind of the structural definition of what democracy means in the U.S. now to argue this, but as should be noted that what democracy is, how that's even defined, has been debated for like thousands of years. So even with the kind of these broad things, there's not universal agreement on what democracy is. But regardless, shifts of political, economic structures, technological advancements, changes influence people's values. So, for example, an analysis of pronoun use in the U.S. American books published between 1960 and 2008 revealed a 10% decrease in the use of words such as, quote, we and, quote, us, alongside a 42% increase in, quote, I and me. Research suggests that already individualistic United States has become more individualistic across the past 50 years. So this is usually thought in the 50s, 60s. Also for our history or our history nerds, shifts to the greater political and economic society of the United States during this time. One example and one marker of this, again, is kind of the use of pronouns. So less collective we pronouns and more I, individualistic. Which brings me to my classic joke that I make in every class that I've created, and I'm still waiting for it to catch on. That is, instead of for me, what happened to for we? So for me, always felt like an observation that this is really reflecting a greater individualistic thoughts, ways of thinking, the self, for me, like my own, as a unique individual kind of thing, way of thinking. So again, demonstrating that cultures change through time, even in the U.S., much more quote unquote individualistic, depending on how you measure it, today than it was even 50 years ago. Now, why is that? Then you can think through specific environmental factors, political, economic, historical, social factors that may be influencing these shifts in cultural values. Next, we have adaptations to metaphysical environment, the nature of reality, the significance of our lives, and the cosmic order. We all know that death is inevitable and inescapable, and that it could come at any moment from any number of causes. Human intellect also allows us to manage fear or death. This is known as TMT, that is terror management theory. As our hominid ancestors' cognitive capacities increased, they began to wonder how the world works and how to do the things necessary to survive. They also began to ask more difficult questions about where they came from, what happens when they die, and what life is all about. In order to feel secure in a threatening world, each cultural group has created answers to these questions. They make up our cultural worldviews. So cultures help us adapt to this metaphysical environment, aka what is reality? Why are we alive? What are we doing? What is my purpose? What is the meaning of things? Is there order? What's going on out there? Humans know they're going to die. They don't know when. They have to deal with this. Culture allows us to feel secure in a threatening world, give a sense of meaning, give a sense of longevity. That's what we'll talk about momentarily. Which brings us to cultural worldviews. They are human-constructed, shared, symbolic conceptions of reality that imbue life with meaning, order, and permanence. All cultural worldviews consist of a theory of reality, institutions, symbols, and rituals that support this worldview, standards of value, the promise of actual and symbolic immortality. By imposing meaning on the subjective experience of reality and creating a sense of enduring significance for the self, cultural reviews help people maintain the belief that they're more than transient animals in a purposeless universe. So again, culture allows us to solve these big existential questions, these metaphysical questions. So we can create a shared reality with symbolic meaning and some kind of order or non-order, but ultimately meaning that perseveres through time. That even in the most individualistic cultures allow you to say you are part of something greater than yourself. You have meaning and not instead alive for 0.00 infinity 1 second of the universe's life. You have meaning, you have purpose, you have enduring significance of yourself and yourself is because yourself is collected or connected to something bigger than yourself. So to speed through this a little bit, all cultures have creation stories. They are stories about how the world was created and where the people came from. So in Mali, in West Africa, the Fulani believe the world was created from a giant drop of milk, from which the god Dunari emerged and created stone. The stone then created iron. Iron created fire. Fire created water, and water created air. The Aztecs' worldview was initiated. Coatlicue, the Lady of Skirt of Snakes, was created in the image of the unknown. She was impregnated by obsidian knife and gave birth to female and male offspring who became the moon and the stars. So again, just some fun variants on the different creation stories that exist in cultures. Worldview maintenance and transmission. Cultural reviews must be transmitted from generation to generation and must be continually reinforced so people can sustain faith in them and avoid the realization that they're essentially fictional accounts of reality. In the US, the elaborate publication system teaches children the history of the United States in terms of names, events, and dates. Similar names, events, and dates might be taught in another culture, but the tone of the lesson might be quite different, conveying that particular culture's current view of those historical people and events. So events can occur between multiple cultures, and different cultures, different countries can have different views and interpretation of the same events. So World War I or something like that, Vietnam War or something like that. What does it mean in X culture? What does it mean in Y culture? What are the lessons you draw from it? Can vary. And those lessons are transmitted across time to reinforce those cultural systems, those belief systems, those worldviews. Of course, what through time can shift. Generational transmission of cultural worldviews, however, occur across not just educational systems, but languages, institutions, including religious institutions, clubs, organizations, rituals, holidays, symbols. Basically, all those kind of sources socializing our cultural worldviews to help people to sustain the belief, the faith in those worldviews, and maintain our collective subjective understanding and meaning that we have subscribed to these arbitrary dates and times. Because these dates and times must have meaning for humanity. We cannot be just every single second disconnected reality, completely hermetically sealed in your individual self. That is not, cultures, societies cannot operate that way. And then we have just world belief. The idea that good things will happen to the worthy and bad things will happen to the unworthy. People look for ways to believe that victims of misfortune must have done something to deserve their fates. So cultures tell us what we should value, what makes a good person, what makes a bad person. And living up to those cultural values, depending on if you agree with those cultural values, give you are linked to a higher sense of self-worth and self-esteem. So thus, again, self-esteem could be considered universal, but how you achieve self-esteem will vary across cultures. And it's also keep in mind, just because there is cultural variation does not mean that they are all created equally. You can imagine something that would give someone self-esteem that was quite antisocial to somebody else. While other sources of self-esteem could be quite universal and pro-social or maybe humanistic, dare I say. But cultures also give us, because they tell us what is valuable, what is good, and what is bad, we have to have an interpretation on what happens, why some people end up in worse circumstances. Why do people end up poor? Why do people end up homeless? Why? Okay, and cultures give some lenses in which we can interpret why bad things happen to bad people, or bad things happen, and why good things happen. One of which is just world beliefs. That is, good things happen to good people, or people are worthy. Bad things happen to bad people, or unworthy. Thus, you deserve it. The world is just, and thus the equalities or inequalities that exist are natural to the world. They exist due to something beyond yourself. They reflect the cosmic order of things, something along those lines. So that person did something, and they deserved their fate is one kind of outcome associated with having high just world beliefs. Because again, the world exists as it is. You believe it's just the way it is. So therefore, those people who are at the top of the social, economic, political hierarchy, they deserve to be there, and the people at the bottom don't deserve to be there as well because that reflects of how bad that group is, that person is, whatever. And thus, those people at the bottom, it is their fault. So you can see how these kind of different cultural worldviews, these belief systems can impact how you act, but also your interpretation of the conditions of other people, and thus what you should do about it, accept it or challenge it. The physical, social, and metaphysical worlds interact to influence some basic aspects of thinking. Cultural differences exist between holistic and analytic thinking. East Asians tend to think holistically, attending to balance, context, and the complex relationships among things. Whereas Westerners, again, broadly speaking, tend to think analytically, focusing on stable categories, classification, and logical linear relationships. Holistic cultures also tend to value moderation over maximization when it comes to the pursuit of desirable goals. So we have holistic and analytical thinking. What holistic thinking, again, trying to interpret events, behaviors, situations by attending to the balance and the context in which behaviors take place. While Westerners, again, broadly speaking, tending to think through analytically and thinking of behaviors and people's behaviors and objects as stable categories and classifications that are stable across all contexts. So let's jump to some specific examples. One aspect of the holistic versus analytic distinction is a focus on relationship as contrasted with categories. Chinese and U.S. American students were presented with tests of 3 words, such as panda, monkey, and banana, and asked which 2 are most closely related. The American students generally chose category-based pairs, such as panda and monkeys, that is animals, whereas the Chinese students generally chose relationship pairs, such as monkey and banana, that is monkeys eat bananas. So here, what this study is getting at is how different cultures group and categorize objects and think about the objects in relation to each other. So in this study, Chinese students were more likely to look at these, think of these terms as relationships. So monkey eats bananas, therefore they have relationships, therefore they go together. Versus the U.S. American students using these kind of these categories that are independent of the relationship to each other. The absence, like any interaction. That is, they are animals. A panda exists, a monkey exists, different contexts, but they're both animals. Versus monkey, banana, they go in the same category because the monkey interacts directly with the banana. The monkey eats the banana. So again, kind of evidence that these different ways of thinking contribute to different ways of analyzing the world, and here just kind of categorizing different objects based on their relationship or lack of relationships to each other. And to wrap it up, culture in the round. Culture makes us human, providing us with a basis for making meaningful sense of our lives and feeling valuable. Culture is continually evolving and are often very heterogeneous, consisting of many subcultures. Forcibly stripping a group of their cultural heritage can be devastating. For example, the forcible removal of the people living on Bikini Island for the purpose of conducting nuclear testing had severe negative consequences on Bikinians' psychological functioning and health. Research on children displaced by war or natural disasters consistently shows that children whose cultural base has been disrupted by traumatic events are more likely to develop PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, whereas those who retain a strong cultural base cope much better. Many of the descendants of the traumatized cultures, largely stripped of their cultural ways and beliefs, and not embraced by or able to embrace the dominant European hegemonic culture, have also had difficulty sustaining a sense of the world and that sense that they are valuable contributors to any meaningful world. So kind of the idea here is that through historical conditions, cultures don't just change, but they get forcibly removed. Most kind of famously in the U.S., kind of indigenous cultures. And some researchers argue, indigenous cultures argue, that this loss of forcible removal of culture and the kind of continued disproportionate poverty within indigenous Native Americans contribute to higher rates of substance abuse, for example, higher rates of homelessness, addiction, that loss of shared collective meaning, that sense of purpose their connection to their cultural rituals forcibly removed, thus kind of contributing to that from an existential perspective or even a self-determination theory perspective, stripping those people of their connection to other people within their cultures or whatever, nature or broadly stated or whatever the environment is, putting those people at greater risk of negative developmental outcomes. And then finally, this other example of Bikini Island being forcibly removed from the nuclear testing, so literally losing your land and having blown up. Again, kind of as the researchers found, this is associated with negative social, cognitive, physical, and mental health outcomes. So, and ultimately kind of reduced lifespans. Again, demonstrating the importance of culture as a meaning-making device, as something that impacts your physical and mental health. All right. So with all that said this week, thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I hope you have a great week.